Hello everybody, my name is Ilya Golitsyn and I will guide you through the process of designing and illustrating the humanoid amphibian creatures, which is the theme of this workshop. But before we jump into the speed up video of the process, I wanted to show you what I started with beforehand. Before I did the recording, I started with a very quick head sketches. So nothing special here. I just indicated kind of two directions which I want to go to. One direction is a bit more like dolphin kind of creatures with breathing organs that actually evolved into this kind of a blowhole at the front of their foreheads. And another variant is a bit more humanoidish, a bit more like the mammals that have the semi-water way of life, like otter or maybe seals. So these guys still have their more or less traditional noses, but because of the fact that they need to have line of sight and breathing with just very small surface of the head peering out of the water, nose becomes raised on the same line as the eyes. So I think so far I will be going with this guy over here in this direction, more humanoidish. I still like this one as well, but it just feels kind of a bit too alien-like, and maybe I will experiment with that in a different design or in a different illustration. But for now, I think I will go into this direction. Okay, so let's switch to the speed up video. So next thing that I'm gonna do, I'm gonna design the proportions and rough anatomy plan of the creature that I'm gonna design. So first thing, I really roughly sketch out the human skeleton, and on top of it, I start designing and planning out what will be proportions of my new amphibian creatures. And here, I think more about sea mammals like otter or walrus or even polar bears. They all have these elongated bodies, very streamlined features that kind of developed in them because of the need to be very agile and fast in the water environment. So that's what I'm doing here. A bit elongated torso, neck, more streamlined and a bit flat head, skull shape, and these flippers on the hands and feet. This will be our like visual language for designing, for showing these creatures area of their habitation, for showing the fact that they spend a lot of time in the sea, in the water. And now I start quickly, on top of the skeleton that I've made, I start quickly applying some muscles and main body masses that will help me in the future to understand how my creatures should look in the illustration that we're gonna make. I'm thinking about whether I should add the tail or not. I'm not sure at that moment if I need the tail at all. Quickly adjusting the proportions. So I usually work with the line art in many stages. So I have a very rough first sketch, or like here, the sketch of the skeleton. Then on top of it, I put the initial sketch on the semi-transparent layer, and then on top of it, I start sketching out, making a new line art that will be a bit more detailed or a bit more clean. Adjusting the pose a bit in order to get a better feeling of weight distribution across the body. Just kind of thinking how this creature will stand on the land. And I aligned all my stages of line art into this lineup, just to compare different variants, but also it kind of gives me a sense of these evolutional zoological pictures where you have the human skeleton and then monkey skeleton and more primitive monkeys. Now that I have an idea of my creature's basic anatomy and proportions, I can start with our main illustration. So first thing I do the sketches of characters' poses. At this point, I already understood that I want to make multiple characters in the illustration in order to show interaction between them and emphasize their like social aspect of these creatures, and I kind of wanted to show that they still have maintained a lot of they still have maintained intellect. And the idea behind these creatures is I forgot to mention that, but I wrote about it in the article. The idea is that these are the descendants of the only humans that survived on the earth in an extinction event. And imagine if the whole animal world kind of disappeared and only humans survived, and thus they kind of had to readaptate to all the different areas of habitation, and thus becoming like sea humans, flying humans, and so on, like underground humans as well. Kind of the same thing that happened when dinosaurs died out. We had only like couple of species, of very small rat-like mammals, but after dinosaurs died, they kind of inherited these huge areas of habitation all of the earth and started adapting to it. And so out of those couple of species, we have all our sea mammals, flying mammals, and land mammals. So kind of this idea. Okay, here I continue with the second stage of line art. First stage was just the pose and the silhouette, and second stage is more about construction. Here I think more about how the body's kind of constructed in the perspective and the camera angle that it shows in this pose. Because on the first stage, when I do the first initial sketch, I definitely want to be as free of any restrictions as possible, and I want to the start of my work to be as much stressless as possible. So that's why I work in these like line art stages. So here I kind of decided that I still want to give these creatures tails, with a small feedback actually from my wife. She said, how can you make such nice creatures underwater, but without tails. That's impossible. And I quite often sketch on this stage, construction stage, do like X-ray sketches when I have a rough indication of bones underneath the flesh, just to understand how the muscles should actually, what shape should the muscles have on top of these structures, bone structures. And sometimes, like here, I do side sketches with the same thing, with skeleton shapes maybe, but in a different angle when I cannot understand. Like, for example, in this case, I couldn't understand what the shape of the rib cage would be, so I made a quick side sketch in the different angle, and defined that I want to have more flattened, more like narrow rib cages. Already at this stage, I started thinking about some clothing that maybe these characters will have, like this guy on the front gets some kind of a collar or a neck piece. And here another side sketch of a construction. I couldn't understand what will be the shape of the elbow there, so kind of made a side sketch of elbow bones. Of course, I could also just go to the internet and take a look at the reference images, but sometimes it really helps me to understand the construction and the flow when I do it myself. Even if I can actually also just like trace the reference image of a skeleton, for example, if I don't understand what is going there, and it will be much more productive than just looking at the reference picture. Still fighting with the flow of the arms. Kind of wanted this guy have this like skewed body in the very graceful underwater movement. Working on this image, I was really inspired by the footage and videos of otters and seals in the water, how these sometimes quite clumsy creatures can be super graceful underwater and very agile and fluid and very, very beautiful. So I actually made here a couple of construction line art, layers of construction line art, thinking more and more like it's kind of like sorting problems. Like at first stage, I sort the very basic problems, and then I start at the next stage with the next layer of line art. I start sorting out a bit smaller, a bit more detailed problems. Like here, for example, I think I'm not that satisfied with shape, with the forms of these lower creature legs. Let's actually give them roles and names, I think, just to help us, to help me to tell you which creature I'm talking about right now. So I think these, the top creature and the side one creature, those whose faces we can see, will be girls, will be female species, and the guy on the front, the one who is rotated back to us, will be male species. Let's call him Ben, I guess, and then top girl will be Cindy, and side girl will be Kate. That's my wife's name, by the way. I hope she doesn't mind. Adding a tail to Cindy. I think I still want to give these creatures their hair to have them kind of the same hair that as humans do. Partly because I just like how hair looks underwater, how it flows, but also, well, I cannot think about the reason for these creatures actually to lose their hair in the evolutionary process. It doesn't, like nature doesn't throw away things that just there and they do not mess with anything, with survival. Well, let them be. So yeah, here I changed the legs position and shapes for Kate, and made a short side step and sketched out the face of the female creature on the side a bit more, just to get better feeling of these creatures before I start sketching, working on their faces in the image. I'm gonna give some kind of a skirt to Cindy, and maybe to Ben, and a bag full of something precious to Kate. So this wraps up my sketching phase of line art, when I define all the main shapes, flow, construction, pose, and start with a cleanup line art. So this will be the final stage of the line art, where I already sorted out all the big problems and big questions, like the design, the anatomy, and poses, and I can just think about the beauty of those lines that I'm making, and maybe add more small details or refine small details. I always, when I work with a line art, and do this several stages of line art, I always work with multiple layers. It's either I take the sketch layer and put it on transparency, and then start sketching in a new layer on top of it, or I use a white layer field with white color that will give me, and then I set this layer on a very small kind of medium transparency, like 80% or 50% transparency, and that creates this tracing paper effect, kind of like a tracing paper, which separates my previous sketch phase with current line art, with the current phase. So thinking more about here also about the weight of the line, the outer lines and the lines between objects a bit thicker. You can notice that I gave to a bit more flippers. I gave to Kate these shells on the neck, which actually has some function behind, or well, at least I thought about some function when was designing them. So the idea is what if these creatures still communicate, and they use and they not only communicate on the land but also communicate underwater, and they use some kind of a clicking noises created by maybe by tongue or by throat, and in order to amplify those noises, those sounds, they use these neck shells, the construction out of a couple of shells on the neck under the jaw, that kind of works as a amplifier of their throat sounds, clicking sounds underwater. So this bag that Kate has, I think the cloth and both materials of the cloth and the bag will be designed in order to look like they are made out of seaweeds probably. And this bag that she carries, well, maybe she just carries some more shells there. Like, thinking about functional elements when you're designing your creatures or characters is very important in order to get a bit more realistic feeling to the characters and to ground them in the world that they live in. And they also help to come up with some new ideas. So here I wasn't very sure about what's going on there with a hand, with Kate's hand. So yeah, sometimes even on a cleanup stage, I still come back to some corrections, still like sketch out some underlying bones to understand how the shapes should flow there. So at this stage, when the cleanup line art is over, almost over, I'm ready to go to the coloring process. The way I put initial color here is I create a layer filled with this turquoise bluish color and put it on multiply, and with some gradients on this same layer, and on the separate layer I create a kind of a lightning effect. So gradients towards the deep of the water surface will be dark, and from the top there will be light rays. Light rays I do with a bright gradient on a separate layer set to screen mode, and I erase this gradient and then put some motion blur on the layer in order to get these rays, God rays, like we sometimes call it. I add a bit more noise effect here and there, just to get this kind of a particle feel. And here from the older sketches of the faces, I copy those faces to the current file and put them in there so that I get constant reference of how these creatures' faces should look. And those rays from the top give me the directional light, and in the places where they hit the characters I add this strong top surface lighting. I also do this lighting on a separate layer with screen mode as well. At this stage, light, first of all, it helps me to start reading the shapes a bit better, because you don't have that much of a volumetric feel from just line art. But it also, it starts to work more as an image with composition, with where these strong points of light create my composition center, my composition accent. And for hair and this top light on the hair and the faces on these semi-soft surfaces, I use a lot the flat brush with one edge soft and with another edge hard. You can find this brush in the brush samples that are attached to the workshop. I would like to show you how I made the caustics effect in the image. I applied clouds and difference clouds filter on a separate layer filled with bluish color. Well, color doesn't matter that much here. And I put this layer on a color dodge mode. And then I just transform it in order to fit the perspective of the planes where this layer will be applied. And basically this difference clouds filter, it creates this nice kind of a lightning effect texture. And you can find those layers in PSD files also attached to the workshop. And with the same layer of difference clouds, I create the effect of the underwater surface, like the inside surface of the water. And with the second layer of the same effect, which I put on multiply, gives me the shadows of the waves on the inner surface of the water. Now that I have some colors and added underwater details like seaweeds on the foreground and some ruins in the background, I want to make some clothing for these characters. And I use a separate layer with layer style set to inner glow, and this inner glow I make darker, so I put the darker color in the settings of the inner glow and put it to multiply mode in order to create this kind of an outlining effect, that kind of a darker outline surrounds all my strokes, brush strokes. And it's similar to the stroke effect in the same layer styles options, but stroke effect gives you a very hard edge, very pixelated borders, while this effect, the inner glow, actually gives you a bit more of a semi-transparency here and there, and it helps you to create a simulation of light and shadow very quickly, because in the places where you apply more pressure, for example, your brushstroke will be more opaque, and thus it will be more of the same color that you selected for this brushstroke. But if you apply less pressure and your brushstroke is more transparent, then you'll get basically the color of the inner glow, the color of the shadow, basically. And thus you kind of can create the volume imitation very quickly. And it really helps with designing clothing, especially when you're using soft, semi-soft brushes. I actually use layer styles quite a lot, especially on early stages of designing, concepting, when I need to get quick lighting effect or material effect out of each brush stroke that I make. So layer effects like this one, like inner glow, um, and maybe also inner shadow, I think they help to create this lighting very fast. And I usually somehow I use inner glow as a shadow effect, although it's glow, and inner shadow I use as a lighting effect. I quite often use it as a directional light because, yeah, in the layer styles effects, you can always change the colors of the of different effects that you apply, and also the blending modes as well. So I just take my inner shadow, for example, I put it on a screen mode, and maybe apply some bright color to it, or screen or color dodge, and I basically get my directional light on the surfaces of each bright brush stroke that I make. I don't use bevel and emboss though that much. I kind of feel like bevel always gives you a very plasticky and very recognizable effect. So in order for these like layer styles to be subtle, and in order to make it as much as less Photoshopy as possible, I always use them very accurately, very minimally. The reason why I wanted to give these characters clothing is because I wanted to show that they still have their own civilization, their own culture, kind of a tribal culture, kind of to emphasize their intellect level, and not showing them just as animals or mindless mutants. But I also thought about a certain function that could be actually behind these garments. See, they construct out of probably out of seaweeds, and this interweaved structure actually soaks with wet underwater and becomes quite soft. But when these amphibians go on the land, it becomes actually stiffer. And the stiffness of it helps them to support their body weight and their elongated necks and torsos upright on the land with surface gravity. Not sure if it would work like that really, but this is kind of the idea that gives me some background behind the design of their garments. Here I adjust the direction of the god rays a bit, just in order to make the composition a bit more dynamic, like going converging into this one like perspective point, but also to have the light hitting the surfaces of the characters a bit more from the top. Also, these garments design helps me to emphasize the tribal aspect of their cultures. Like if you take a look at the clothing and jewelry of the tribes, maybe like African tribes or Asian tribes, you can find that the way they construct their clothing, the way they construct the jewelry is very intricate, very complex, and you obviously see by the complexity of it that they've been developing these ways in a very like conservative, traditional process of fashion evolution for ages and ages, and there is like this feeling of history in and a certain meaning in every piece they wear. Take a look, for example, at the Maasai from Kenya or Mursi tribes from Ethiopia. They all have these kind of very complex constructed jewelry, especially the women. So I'm trying with this very complex interweaved constructed pattern of the clothing of these amphibians. I'm trying also to get this bit of a tribal feeling there as well. You can notice throughout the workshop that I tend to flip image horizontally quite a lot. I do it in the beginning quite often when I start with the construction and anatomy, just to check for different mistakes, because when you flip image horizontally, your eye sees the same, looks at the same image, but from a very like unexpected point of view, and you usually are able to see more mistakes there. This is kind of the thing that I've noticed even before I started digital painting and concepting. Like I was doing some drawings maybe on the paper, and as soon as you put your drawing, like a portrait, for example, against the mirror, you notice that, oh, the eye is completely off, or the nose is off, or something else. So mirroring images helps a lot to find mistakes there, but also I continue doing it even at this stage when I'm just rendering out or adding more details, because it also helps me just to keep the fresh eye on the picture, so that my view is not getting too used to the same thing during those hours that I'm working on it. So the clothing is almost done at that stage, and I would like to show you a couple of more tricks that I used before we go to the final image. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to apply the same caustics layer to our characters, so that they also have these water reflections running around the body. But this time I will do it a bit differently. Well, the main thing that is different here, that is going to be different here, I will apply a bit of a brushstroke effect, which in the filters gallery, which will help me to make these caustics a bit more precise, a bit more crisp. But what I also will do, like erase the effect only to the lid surfaces of their bodies, so that this effect will be probably only visible on the lid surfaces, because it actually is the source of light here. And what I'm gonna do here is with a liquify filter, I apply certain warping to the texture of the caustics effect, so that it follows the flow of the bodies. And here I'm gonna add a bit more colors or like different tones to the characters. I decided that they are a bit too monochrome, and with a quick masking tool, with the textured brushes, I selected these spots of their bodies, like the inner part of the bodies, and duplicated this layer and changed its hue saturation just to make these kind of pigmentation spots on the inner side of the bodies, just like, whales have or dolphins have, these kind of sea creatures pigmentation, just to add, to kind of reinforce this like visual language that of these creatures that tells us that they live underwater. Okay, so here's the final image. I've applied some adjustments and added some elements, but unfortunately I had to do it on a very slow machine, so recording was terrible. And here I just would like to recapture what I've done so far. I added some background elements like bubbles, nothing special, just some bubble brush painted elements. You can find this brush in the workshop brushes. And I rendered a bit more the foreground weeds, applied the blur to the very foremost part of the weeds so that they look a bit more out of focus. And what I also do in the end of the image, quite often in the end of the work, I add a bunch of color correction layers just to help the image to come together better. So I applied the overlay gradient that kind of brings a bit more contrast to the lower part of the image and adds a bit more shadow there. And this layer, which is kind of appeared as an experiment result, I just inverted the previous blue gradient layer and achieved this quite weird red gradient layer, but as I put it on a very transparent, on a very low opacity and vivid light mode, it actually gave me a very nice reddish tint to the image, which I kind of wanted to keep because the initial image turned out to be a bit too monochromatic, a bit too bluish. And the final step is adding the sharpen layer. I just copied all the image on a new layer and added the unsharp mask filter just to make the textures and some elements to pop out a bit more. You can see probably I put it on 100%. It always helps also with a printing image because colors tend to bleed a lot when they are printed. So adding the unsharp mask layer helps to keep image crisp when it's printed. Okay, so that's it. You can find this file in the PSDs attached to the workshop. So I hope you've enjoyed it and good luck.